Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and welcome to my April Reflections video, where we're going to talk about some of the decks that I worked with, the books that I read, channels I watched, and other things that I got up to in April of 2021. So you know me, I like to jump right into the decks in case that is all that you are here for. So let's go ahead and flip the camera around and talk about the decks I worked with in April 2021. So for April, I decided to use one main Oracle deck as my focus deck for the month. So this was the deck that I used for my focal point in every reading that I did all throughout the month, and then I paired my different tarot decks with it. Now I did do a whole video on how I went about selecting the decks that I was going to be using for the month. I will leave that linked in the description box below if that's something you want to check out. So now today we're going to take a look at how those decks actually ended up working out for me. So first, let's talk a little bit about my focus deck, which was the Goddess Dream Oracle. This is the deck by Wendy Andrew, released by Rockpool Publishing, and I really enjoyed working with this particular deck throughout the month. And I do want to give special mention to the guidebook because I did find the guidebook to be quite lovely, and I really enjoyed diving into the messages for each card. And we had the keyword, which is definitely something I focused in on. We also had kind of a key phrase. It did speak to which goddess was represented, if there was a particular goddess represented in the card. So this was a card that I got in the month of April. This was the card of Direction featuring Rihanna, the Horse Maiden. So it says, Horse Maiden and Goddess of Love travels her path with courage and certainty. I love that it gave us a little bit about the goddess when there was one directly tied into the card. We have a wonderful focus word, so direction. There was a key phrase or a prompt. For this particular one, the question is, where are you heading? We have a little bit about the card and a message. And the other thing that I really found that I liked about this deck was the affirmation at the end. I found that that was a really great way to kind of wrap up my reading. So that was a great experience to work with just one Oracle deck. So normally when we see these kind of pairings or we're having these focal decks, we're usually focusing in on like a particular tarot deck. And that's something that I'm going to be doing in the next month. But for April, I focused in on a single Oracle deck and paired my tarot around it. I did also edge this deck. I did a whole mod with me on it, which was a lot of fun. I really do like the way it came out, even though I kind of messed it up. But I think it still came out quite lovely. So real quick, before we take a look at the pairings, I just want to mention it was really wonderful working with this particular Oracle deck all month long and having it be the only Oracle deck that I worked with. So I was able to really tap into the energy of the cards. It made a really wonderful focal point for my readings because not only do we have this beautiful artwork, but we have very direct keywords, which I did quite appreciate. It really gives you something to focus in on. So if I were to pull this card in my 3-card reading, so what would be my prompt? Well, what am I looking at? I'm looking at life purpose and manifesting my dreams. That would be what that reading would be speaking to. Here, the reading would be speaking to acceptance and the cycles of life. And so the cards that I would get around it in terms of my tarot, I would be looking at it through the lens of this particular Oracle card. So I really enjoyed working with it. I love putting Oracle in the center as a focal point in general, and using one Oracle deck for the whole month for that process was really fantastic because I really got a good chance to get to know this deck and to pair it with several of my different tarot decks, which helps bring out some different messages and energies in the deck. So let's go ahead and take a look at the pairings that I did for the month. So the first pairing that I did in the first week of April was the Goddess Dream Oracle paired with the Dreaming Way Tarot. This is kind of a workhorse deck for me. It's one of my favorites and definitely a deck that I can pull for just about anything. I love the imagery and the artwork on it, and the messages are really clear. So you can see here how we have the Goddess Dream Oracle as my focal point, and then we have the tarot cards around it, which give it that fuller, deeper message. And I do think that these particular decks pair together quite well. Let's look here. We have self-exploration in between the Queen of Wands and the Magician. So definitely looking at stepping into your own power here. I think that's quite lovely. Here we have bravery between the Temperance and the Hierophant. Explore your inner and wild places. That's interesting, isn't it, between those two cards? I do find that the artwork goes pretty well together. They're definitely different art styles, but I think they do look lovely on the table. And more importantly though, I think they really do read quite well together. So here we have In Nature, connect with nature between the sun and the tower. Quite some potent messages here. And you can also find some flows of color throughout these decks as well, and that's something that I definitely tend to look for. I love when the colors are cohesive, when we can find those kind of energy flows across the two decks. So here we have Transformation, be open to change, between the Star and the King of Wands. Beautiful. Again, picking up on those rich dynamic colors, which I think is just beautiful. Both of these decks have a kind of dreamlike quality to them. That was definitely my focus for the month. I really enjoyed kind of tapping into that dream world. So trust all is as it should be between Death and the Five of Pentacles, right? Even in those hard times, we still have to trust that the universe knows what it's about and what we're doing. So here's Intention with spinning fate between the Four of Cups and Judgment. I love this idea of kind of the lines play between all of these decks. You get kind of this swirly thing going on with the cups here in the cloud, and it kind of follows this line through her little thread that she's spinning, and we can see it kind of reflected here coming down into these little tendrils off their robes here, these little wraps off their robes. So it's really interesting, I think, when I find those kind of patterns within the card, how things are flowing. So this is telling me it's moving from the Four of Cups, we're flowing through our intention and coming out the other side and releasing down into Judgment. And I love when we get these kind of dynamic contrasts between the decks as well. I think that's just beautiful. Let's take a look at one more. Oh, we have Happiness between the Ace of Cups and the Queen of Cups. I think that's a wonderful one to stop on right there. So the next pairing that I did in the next week was the Goddess Dream Oracle paired with the Fairy Tale Tarot by Lisa Hunt. This is, of course, the Spanish edition. The English edition is currently out of print. I do have the app on my phone, so I can reference the English guidebook. And I love this deck, but I do have to say, and I think I mentioned this before in other videos, that working with the Spanish edition sometimes does give me pause because I do have to kind of think about what card I'm looking at here and kind of, do the translation in my head. I have worked with this deck enough to kind of know what the cards, what the Spanish titles are at this point. But it still does kind of give me pause from time to time, just to kind of take that split second and to kind of just think again, oh, what is that word again in Spanish? And then to translate it. And so that would be my only real quibble with this particular pairing. And it's nothing really to do with the pairing. It's just a challenge that I have whenever I work with this deck. There is definitely talk of Lisa Hunt releasing a Kickstarter or something along those lines to re-release this deck in English edition, which I think would be fantastic. They were asking about cardstock not too long ago on the Facebook group. And so I'm definitely on board for that. I would love to have this in an English edition. Just again, while the Spanish edition works quite well, it does kind of give me pause where I have to kind of stop for a minute and really think about what words I'm looking at here and make the translation in my head, or I have to get out my phone and look it up. But overall, I do think that these decks do pair quite well together. We definitely, again, have those different art styles, but I found what I was really looking for and what was really calling to me when I was working with this pairing is what all the figures were doing. So really focusing in more on the characters in the cards rather than the kind of overall aesthetic. So this here, we're looking at intuition here, and I'm looking at this figure and I'm thinking about, what is this figure telling me? It's kind of telling me to tap into that inner wisdom, which we see here written on the bottom of the card. But it's telling me to tap into that inner wisdom that maybe comes from a wild place. So that kind of more innate inner wisdom, less of the thinking mind and more of the feeling mind in my just kind of in my interpretation here. And then I'm kind of looking at these figures and thinking about, well, what are these figures doing? These figures look like they're kind of maybe setting these birds free. So this is telling me that maybe I need to kind of let loose that wild intuition, set it free, and let it help bring some things into balance for me, to bring some calm back. And I think that that's really kind of key in how I was working with these particular decks was a little bit more on the intuitive level. And I think, again, partially that is because it does take me a moment to think about what each of these cards mean. But I also feel like the figures in these cards are very expressive, and so I really like to pay attention to their facial expressions, and I like to pay attention to what they're doing, how they're interacting with the other elements on the card. The fairy tales that go along with this deck are quite wonderful, and I do often reference those and pull those in for these particular readings. But this time around, I found I was working with it a little bit more intuitively, and I think it's because the Goddess Dream Oracle to me definitely feels like it taps into intuitive space for me. It is definitely kind of more of a dreamscape, kind of a liminal space, and approaching the fairy tale tarot in that way of really kind of focusing in on intuition more than anything else, I think was a really lovely experience. Again, also looking at colors and flow and things of that nature as well, because those are always things that I keep in mind when I'm looking at these pairings. But for this particular instance, I was really more paying attention to the figures and the characters in the card and kind of what are they doing and how does that relate to my focus card in the middle here. And that was really lovely working with them together in that way. So the last pairing that I did for actually the last 2 weeks of the month was working with the Goddess Dream Oracle and the Tarot of the Mystical Moments. Now these two decks, aesthetically speaking, don't necessarily go together. They are two very different art styles. We have more of the traditional art here in the Goddess Dream, and then we have the digital photo collage in the Tarot of Mystical Moments. But I found that the messages were really cohesive. And in fact, I enjoyed it enough to want to work with it a second week. So I just kept using it into the last week of April. And I really did enjoy the way that the Goddess Dream kind of created a focal point and then expanding those messages out around it. So you can see we have forgiveness. And this card is really tapping into the idea of compassion and kindness. And here we have this between the Six of Wands and the Moon. So what do we need to have compassion and kindness for? Where in our lives do we need to kind of cultivate this energy? And I think that these decks actually work quite well together in terms of creating those sort of focal point readings. They're both quite busy decks, meaning that there's a lot going on within each of these cards. So I think 3 cards was actually plenty to get some really deep, wonderful messages out of these 2 particular decks. So I love this. We have your path, have courage to follow your own path. And we have the 6 of Swords here and the 9 of Wands. So this to me is really speaking of maybe just letting go of some of those things that have been keeping you from following your path and letting them go, releasing that anchor that we see here in the card and kind of focusing in on your own path, as we see kind of that represented here by this island. And that's just kind of what I'm picking up in the moment because I'm looking at it through the lens of your path, through the lens of the Goddess Dream Oracle. And this 9 of Wands over here reminds me that, there will be challenges along the path, but that's okay. It's about the journey, not the destination, right? And so I think that this works really lovely together to really dive deeper into these particular cards. And I really enjoyed the way they worked together. And there's definitely things that you can pick up in terms of color and flow and energy and elemental associations within each of these cards. But I did find that the Goddess Dream kind of really did create a nice focal point for the Tarot of Mystical Moments. Being that there's a lot going on in these cards. There's a lot of elements that are collaged together to create these really beautiful cards. And so you can go really in depth with that, but sometimes you can also get lost in that. So by having the Goddess Dream as like a focal point, I'm looking at each of these cards through the lens of a new beginning. So taking a fresh look at life. So each of these cards I'm now exploring through that particular lens, which kind of gives me something to focus on. So I'm not kind of overwhelmed by the amount of symbolism and energy going on in each of these individual cards. It gives me something to focus on. Where am I seeing awareness in these cards? What do these 2 cards tell me about being aware? I find it always really helpful to pair an oracle deck that has really succinct keywords with those kind of busier or really deeply symbolic or really heavily collaged decks, just because it gives me kind of something to focus on. Because if we're looking at each of these decks, I just laugh because these two cards definitely feel like they're dreaming. We have the kind of hat here, made out of the tree trunk with the birds on top. And then here her hair is, made of the clouds. So definitely ties into that idea of dreaming. But if I was looking at these two cards, not looking at this focal point, not looking at through the lens of dreaming, that may not be the element I pick up on. That may not be the first thing that my intuition goes, that's the focal point. That's the element right now. So if I wasn't looking at it through the lens of dreaming, maybe I would be focusing more on the scales or the sword. But here I'm actually focusing on the clouds and the way her hair, and that reminds me of kind of being lost in your own dreams and maybe needing to kind of come back down to earth. This is something that I wouldn't necessarily be looking at with these two particular cards. If I was just looking at them, on their own, would I tap into that idea of dream? Maybe not so much. And so it gives me the opportunity to look at these cards through a different lens. And I think that's a really fun and really insightful way to kind of look at the cards. And I had a lot of fun working with it this month, looking at it through that lens. So there was one other deck that I worked with this month, and it was the Ostara Tarot. And this deck has been around. It's gone from me to my youngest and back again. I was going to declutter it, and then there was a whole thing about that. And so at the beginning of the month, my youngest was out of town, and this is a deck that I kind of associate with our relationship. And I don't know if it's just because we've bounced it back and forth so often, but it's just definitely one that speaks to that relationship for me. And I was missing my kiddo, so I decided to pull this one out and use it for my seasonal Sunday readings all month long. And I do have to say, okay, first of all, this box is obnoxious. I have bought fabric because this is what happens when you try to get it out. Like worst box design ever. The guidebook is it's okay. It's not like my favorite, but it's a decent enough guidebook. And there are some cards in here that I absolutely love, and there are some cards in here that kind of missed the mark for me. Like, I love this Justice card. So this is one of those decks where it's a case of there's 4 different artists, and so there's kind of 4 different art styles in this deck, which I think is kind of what throws me off, because some of these cards totally miss the mark for me and others are like spot on. There is one particular card in here. I will see if I can find it. See, like, there's just times when it's just like, to me, this is, I think, the 2 of Swords. To me, this looks like an 8 of Swords card because we have the person in the bird cage, and I get more of an 8 of Swords vibe from it. Here is actually my favorite card in the deck, and this might be surprising because if you've watched my channel before, you may know that I kind of have a thing for whales. Like, whale energy is like always been a part of my life ever since I was a kid. And this whale, has 10 swords sticking out of it. But here's the thing about this card, and one of the things that I do really appreciate about this deck. This card looks like the whale is breaching, and these swords kind of remind me of like barnacles. And so the whale is breaching, and when it falls back down into the ocean, or really when it slams back down into the ocean, it's going to knock all those swords off. And so, like, removing barnacles. And that's how I kind of see this 10 of Swords, is that this whale has come up from the depths with all of these swords, and as it splashes back down into the ocean, going back into its realm, it's going to knock all those swords off, and then it's going to go on with its journey. When you look at it from that lens, and that's how I see it, I just think that is the most beautiful depiction of the 10 of Swords. And the fact that these aren't actual swords, they're just little white symbols of swords, I think is what allows me to be able to make that connection. because they're not actually stuck into the whale. If they were actually stuck into the whale and there was like blood and stuff, yeah, this deck would be out of my collection. But I do really love this interpretation, and some of the cards I think are just so smart and really interesting. It's in particular, it's the whale cards I think in this deck that, and there's a couple of them that really kind of do it for me. I also quite love this Eight of Pentacles. I mean, to me, that's definitely an Eight of Pentacle energy. I think it's beautiful. I quite like this Knight. So here's another card that I just absolutely love. We have this group that has come together and they're like calling up the spirit of the whale. And I just think that's beautiful. So there are some cards in this deck that I am just like all about, that I think they are just absolutely fantastic. This Queen is just stunning. I mean, some of them just really, really are spot on for me. This Queen, I mean, just beautiful. And then there are some of them that I'm just like this Judgment here that just kind of missed the mark for me. I mean, look at the Seven of Pentacles with the little raccoon family. It's one of those decks that I'm just like, I love it in some respects, and in some respects it doesn't quite do it for me. But there are some cards, and here's another one that I just absolutely adore. And I think they are just gorgeous representations. I mean, even the Strength card with the dragon, I love that. This card here, I mean, it's just, yeah, some of them are just absolutely beautiful and really, really resonate. And some of them just like, I don't quite get. And I think that it might be the difference between the different artists and the art styles and the depictions. And I think that really might be what it is. Like, I love this Two of Swords too. So it's just, you know, this is one that doesn't really do it for me. But again, this one I think is quite beautiful. It was just a really wonderful way to connect with my kiddo while they were on vacation. And I just felt that connection, and then just decided to keep using it all month long just so I could really give it another chance, because it's always one that I'm like, I really wanted to love it, but I don't. But the truth is that there are actually cards in here that I do really, really love. So that's a look at the decks that I worked with throughout the month of April. We had the Goddess Dream Oracle that I definitely used as my focal point for the majority of my readings, which we'll see reflected in my tarot journal when we take a look at that. Then I also paired it with the Dreaming Way Tarot to start the month off. Then I've also paired it with the Fairy Tale Tarot and wrapped up the month pairing it with the Tarot of Mystical Moments. This deck is also going to be getting its gilding removed because I just can't. Ostara Tarot, which was the other deck that I ended up pulling in. It wasn't a deck I intended to work with throughout the month, but it definitely was one that kind of made its way onto my table and kind of just hung out there for the month. And I used it for my seasonal Sunday readings all month long, and that was really fantastic. So real quick, I just want to talk about the books that I am currently reading, because I didn't finish any book in April. I started 2 books and I am still reading them. So I thought we'd just chat about those really quick. There's not going to be like a full review because I haven't finished either one of them. My fiction book that I'm reading is Sisters of the Solstice Moon by Gina Martin. I found this book recommendation on Jessica the Story Witch's channel. I don't remember when she showed it, but I fully remember seeing it when she showed it, and it was in my Amazon cart for like a really long time. And I finally decided to get it and start diving into it in April, and I'm really enjoying it. I am still working my way through it because I'm trying to read a little bit slower and trying to take my time and really dive deeper into my books, which has been really wonderful. So I'm really enjoying that one so far. The other book that I am reading is Seasons of the Moon and Flame by Danielle Dolsky. Now, I will have to say, in all honesty, that this is, I believe, the 3rd book by this particular author. I do have the first 2. I have read the first 2. And to be perfectly honest, they kind of missed the mark for me a little bit. So I was a little bit hesitant to pick up the 3rd one. I'm going to be perfectly honest about that. But it is about, as it says here on the back, prepare to be mentored by the sacred hags. And that's kind of what got me, because it is talking about, crone energy, hag energy. And so I was like, that's definitely something that I am kind of stepping into working with myself. And so I decided to go ahead and get it. And I do have to say that I'm enjoying this one so much more. It feels a little bit more grown up. So the first 2 books of hers weren't really like my favorites, but I am really enjoying this one. And the only reason I really point that out is because if you're like me and the first two books kind of were like, didn't quite resonate with you, and you are interested in kind of that crone energy, tapping into the sacred hag, you might go ahead and check this one out. So that one I've been really pleasantly surprised by, and I am really enjoying it. So one of the things that I ended up doing was making some bags. And I have had several people ask if I'm gonna have bags in my shop soon. I do hope so. Here's the deal with my bag making. That's not like my main thing, right? I don't make like bags like on the regular, but what I do is whenever I make bags for my own decks, I always make 2, sometimes 3 if I have enough fabric, which I usually don't, because I usually just buy enough to make 2. And then I will, when I get a decent collection of them, I'll throw them up on my website. Hopefully I will have another selection of them soon. I will be sure to like leave a message on my community tab or something when they're available. But I just wanted to share with you some of the ones that I made for my decks, because it was just fun and I enjoyed making them. I do have bags in all of these fabrics as well that will be available if you're interested later on. These story medicine cards, they do come in a tuck box, and so I made bags. This is the bag that I made for the first edition, and it has this kind of like little wild print inside, which I really, really like. And I also made this butterfly one for the animal one, which has the sunflowers and bees on the inside and the butterflies on the outside, which I thought was pretty fitting. I tried to keep in the red tone. Red's not really like a color I work with or use a lot, but my goal was to kind of match these backs, right? And keep true to the theme of the deck. The fabric is very customized to how I feel about the deck, and so that's what each of these represent. I am not going to show you what's in these 2 because there's a video on these coming out, but this is the bag that I made for my Tarot of the Mystical Moments, and it just has this gorgeous, like kind of almost vintagey looking floral fabric with just, it's going to catch the light, but just kind of that like paint splashy blue green. I don't know. Again, not really my thing, but it was fun to make. And then this one is the bag that I made for my Ostara tarot, and it has this beautiful pink and black and green fabric, and then again that same blue on the inside. So I'm not going to show you those because that's a video coming up in May. So those were a couple of the bags that I made for my decks, which was really fun. And there are a couple things that I made. I made some devotional candles, which that is actually a video on my other channel. If you're interested in checking that out, I'll leave a link below. But I ended up basically making some kind of shabby chic devotional candles for my Mary altar. And I have a few other things that I made for that, which are going to be coming out in May on my other channel. So if that's like other crafty things, if you're interested in that, be sure and check that out. So that was a lot of fun. I had fun being crafty in April. It was fun. I took a week off from everything else basically and just did crafts and sewed and, you know, did all that other stuff. So now let's chat about some of the channels that I've been enjoying over the last month. There are lots more than I could possibly mention here. I keep a running playlist that just kind of runs in the background while I'm working, unless I'm working on a video, because then that's just distracting. But while I'm working, I generally have YouTube running in the background, or while I'm doing chores or whatever. And so a lot of times I watch a ton of tarot videos, but I don't always get around to commenting because, again, they're just like playing back to back to back on my TV, my computer, whatever it is that I've got going on. So I do watch a lot, and I am trying to take note of what I am watching, but honestly, there's a lot, and I watch a lot of other stuff besides TarotTube as well, and so it kind of all gets mingled in together. So Manuela at Place of Stillness, she does a lot of really great, thoughtful content, and I really enjoy her channel. She fairly recently did a video on body journaling, which was just so creative and clever and so much fun. Definitely go check it out. She basically gets her body involved in her journaling. I don't want to give it all away, but it's a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed watching that. Also, Danny from Danny Mystic did this fantastic video about how she connects with her decks. She did part 1 of that. That was so much fun. I love seeing how other people work with their decks, how other people's processes are, and so getting that little peek into Danny's practice was so much fun. Really enjoyed that one as well. And I think the channel that I've been binge watching the most in April is Candy of Candy's Soul and Soil. Candy has been doing some really fantastic videos on her channel. There is not like even one that I could point out and say, you have to go watch this. Just go watch her channel. It is so vulnerable and honest and fun, and there's just something really special about the videos that Candy makes. So definitely, if you haven't had a chance to check out Candy and Danny and Manuela, please go check out their channels, like, subscribe, show them all the love. I know everybody really appreciates the support. This is a lot of work and it is a lot of your blood, sweat, and tears, heart and soul that goes into creating these. And for most people, it really is a labor of love. They do this because they love it. So just for everybody out there who makes content from a place of authenticity and from a place of love, I just want to say thank you for your contributions to our community, and to everybody who leaves comments and watches and likes and subscribes. We all thank you as well, because really, you guys are why we're here, right? To have this conversation, to create this community. And so it's really fantastic that we can all interact this way together. So I think that is it for me today. That is a look at the decks I worked with, the books I read, some of the channels I've been enjoying, and some other various things. I hope you had a wonderful April, and I wish you many blessings moving into May. Oh, now for the post video cleanup. Okay, I do really like this deck. Like, I've just kind of come around to, it's just, it is one that I like. I'm kind of getting on board with it. Okay, see, this was just the lid. So I need to play resort the decks, because we have, again, just the lid. The magic of YouTube, right? I want to make sure I get them all going the right way, so we're going to flip them around. And I know I've shown this before in another post-vid ramble, but this is what I end up with at the end of one of these videos, is this gigantic stack of cards. And so I need to, I guess I put the other ones away, so I guess we'll just make a pile. So then I just sit here and kind of play resort the cards. I've got way too many. They're just sliding all over the place. Okay, I just need to see this real quick. Shuffling that deck though, it's not the easiest thing in the world for me to do. Okay, let's just real quick. Let's just have a real quick play. This deck is also not easy to shuffle because it's like that cardboardy, and it's a bad mod job. This was before I started using measurements. I might actually repurchase this deck and retrim it. I'm just gonna mix it up a little bit because we've kind of already looked through it. Oh, okay. I am really loving this. Look at this with all the yellow, the 7 of Pentacles, the 4 of Pentacles, and the 3 of Cups. Beautiful. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I just kind of needed to see this because I was using my Oracle as my focal point this month, but yeah, I think this is actually quite the interesting pairing. Look at the color play between these cards. Again, I love the contrast in the art styles with the hand-drawn illustration of the Dreaming Way and then the collage of the Tarot of Mystical Moments. Oh, that's kind of pretty. I'm gonna have to play with this some more because the 7 of Pentacles between our queens. How beautiful. Okay, enough playing. I'm gonna finish cleaning up now. Thank you for joining me today. You'll find links for everything featured here in the description box below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.